I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. MessianicApologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for November the 21st, 2025. Yesterday, in our theology roundup, we discussed the Fourth Commandment from Exodus 20. Today, Friday, looking forward to Shabbat, we will be addressing the Fourth Commandment from Deuteronomy 5. And it's clear enough that there are some similarities, but there are also some differences. And certainly we, as good biblical readers and examiners, want to know what different examiners have said about one passage versus another or compared to another. All right, so our study has been taken from our ministry's publication, the Messianic Sabbath Helper. It's available in both paperback as well as ebook. It was recently updated and given a refresh for 2025. You can take a look at it at outreachisraelbookstore.com. All right, so let me switch windows really quickly, and we'll get into our analysis. All right, there we go. Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15, the Fourth Commandment. Observe the Sabbath day, Yom Shabbat, Tree of Life version, to keep it holy, as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, commanded you. You shall labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath, Shabbat, to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, in which you shall not do any work. Neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your livestock, nor your sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. Mark 2:27, Matthew 12:2, Luke 13:14, 23:56. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, brought you out of there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, commanded you to keep the Sabbath day, Yom Shabbat, Tree of Life version. And this is from the Messianic Apologetics Revised Version, author's rendering, which has been adapted from the public domain World Messianic Bible. The repetition of the Fourth Commandment. Okay, there we go. The repetition of the Fourth Commandment in Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15, having been previously witnessed in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, which we addressed yesterday, allows Bible readers not only the opportunity to compare and contrast the perspectives of each, but also to evaluate the thoughts, observations, stresses, and conclusions of different examiners. Indeed, our appreciation of the institution of the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat would be limited if Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15 is not probed for its significance. There are some differences in the version of the Fourth Commandment appearing in Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15 when compared with Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Conservatives who believe in a Mosaic origin of the Torah or Pentateuch are likely to explain these differences on the basis of the setting portrayed in Deuteronomy, with ancient Israel being prepared to enter into the Promised Land, and not Israel at Mount Sinai as previously recorded. Differences between these two versions of the Fourth Commandment may be also explained on the basis of different theological stresses. More liberal examiners, adhering to the JEDP documentary hypothesis, may be prone to explain the differences between Exodus 20 verses 8 through 11 and Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15, with this version of the Fourth Commandment originating from the so-called D source or Deuteronomist, likely from the period of the Josianic reforms, 2 Kings 22, 8 through 8 following. Deuteronomy 5:12. This edition of the Fourth Commandment opens with the admonition, "Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you." Deuteronomy 5:12, New Jewish Publication Society version. The statement, "Shamru et Yom HaShabbat," safeguard the Sabbath day, Art Scroll Tanakh, or keep the Sabbath day, King James Version, is different from what appears in Exodus 20 verse 8, which has "remember the Sabbath day," World Messianic Bible. A theological explanation comparing and contrasting these two statements might argue, among other interjections, that to remember the Sabbath is to focus the attention of a person on God as creator, and that to observe the Sabbath is to focus attention upon the necessity for rest, which is something the Israelites scarcely received in Egypt, Deuteronomy 5:15. And with this in mind, the different venues of Israel at Mount Sinai and Israel preparing to enter the Promised Land would further account for some differences of emphasis in the Fourth Commandment. In the Talmud, though, it is witnessed how the differences between Exodus 20 verse 8 and Deuteronomy 5:12 are thought to have come about because God spoke both of them at the same time. Remember the Sabbath day, Exodus 20 verse 8, and keep the Sabbath day, Deuteronomy 5:12, were pronounced in a single act of speech, an act of speech that the mouth cannot express nor the ear take in. Talmud Shavuot 20b. J.H. Hertz, reflecting more of a 20th century Orthodox Jewish perspective in his Pentateuch and Haftarahs, instead indicates how, quote, "Tradition explains that the latter, remember, refers to the positive precepts in connection with the Sabbath, to its sanctification by wine, prayer, and Sabbath joy, whereas observe the Sabbath means refraining from any desecration through labor by self or dependence," unquote. Richard Elliott Friedman, who holds to a source-critical view of the Pentateuch and his commentary on the Torah, notably does not posit different sources as being the cause of differences between Exodus 20 verse 8 and Deuteronomy 5:12. Friedman instead looks to two different emphases being present, detailing, quote, "Many have commented on the two words. The most basic explanation may be that the two are both necessary and complementary. In the mind, one must remember it. In actions, one must observe it," unquote, from his commentary on the Torah. A conservative evangelical Christian commentator like R.K. Harrison draws the conclusion for Deuteronomy 5:12, quote, "Moses used a stronger term here because he was exhorting the people to observe God's commandments," unquote. Noting that Shabbat is to be a holy and sanctified institution, Jeffrey H. Tegay focuses attention on, quote, "The fact that Sabbath observance is an emulation of God's activity and an acknowledgement of his creation of the world explains why observing it honors him. It explains, too, why the Sabbath command is the longest in the Decalogue and why it is sometimes paired with the prohibition of idolatry. Like the latter commandment, observing the Sabbath is one of the quintessential expressions of loyalty to God," unquote. While all readers tend to be in agreement that keeping the weekly Sabbath or Shabbat is something which would make ancient Israel distinct, and consequently Jewish observance, albeit somewhat strict, of the Sabbath throughout religious history has provided a noticeable level of distinction. The original distinction of Sabbath observance actually came out of there not being any similar institution in the ancient world. P.C. Craigie observes, quote, "The word Sabbath is a noun related to the verb shavat, meaning cease, rest. Although cognate forms of this verb are found in other Semitic languages, there is no clear evidence of a Sabbath day or time construed as a week apart from the Israelite tradition. Thus, the Fourth Commandment once again established a point of distinction between the religion of Israel and that of her neighbors." Unquote. Deuteronomy 5:13 and 14. The distinction of the Sabbath as an institution is surely present in how 6 days shall you labor and accomplish all your work. Deuteronomy 5:13, Art Scroll Tanakh, as it is different from the previous 6 working days. The Sabbath as an inclusive institution, which is to benefit the broad community of ancient Israel, is further elaborated. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your manservant or your maidservant or your ox or your ass or any of your cattle or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your manservant and your maidservant may rest as well as you. Deuteronomy 5:14, Revised Standard Version. It is to be fairly recognized how the Sabbath is hardly something established by God for the sole benefit of ethnic male Israelites. Friedman draws attention to how, quote, "The text does not mention your wife. One might take this to be male chauvinist, but I think that in this case it is the opposite. The text mentions daughters as well as sons, and it mentions females as well as male servants here and elsewhere, Deuteronomy 12:12, 18. Therefore, the words you and your sons and your daughter must be understood to be directed to both men and women, husbands and wives in the first place," unquote, from his commentary on the Torah. What tends to be piqued in contemporary Messianic discussions over the Sabbath is the place of the ger or sojourner, defined by the Kaler-Baumgartner lexicon with protected citizen or stranger. The ger is often concluded to represent the place of the non-Jew in today's Messianic movement. In the view of Tegay, quote, "This reminder to include resident aliens in the Sabbath rest is comparable to Deuteronomy's exhortations to include them in religious celebrations. 16:11, 14, 26:11. Such reminders are necessary because of the aliens' vulnerability and the likelihood that their needs would be overlooked. The motive given for the Sabbath in Exodus 23:12 is indicative of the low status they might hold, as well as the Torah's solicitude for their welfare," unquote. The sojourner or ger, a non-Israelite, but resident within the community of ancient Israel, was to observe the weekly Sabbath. The presence of how your ox, your donkey, and your every animal, Art Scroll Tanakh, were to be given a Sabbath rest must not be overlooked either. Hertz states, quote, "Care and kindness to cattle are of such profound importance for the humanizing of man that this duty has its place in the Decalogue," unquote, from Pentateuch and Haftorahs. Some, to be sure, have posited various hypotheses regarding why different groups of persons and animals appear in Deuteronomy 5:14, but that is not the intention of the commandment. The intention, as Christopher J.H. Wright puts it, is that, quote, the Sabbath commandment is specifically for the benefit of the whole working population, animal as well as human, unquote. Harrison further observes, quote, the humanitarian emphasis of this verse is an additional reason for Sabbath observance. There is no need to devise complicated explanations of the origin of such amplifications of the original commandment. They are exactly such as would arise naturally in the mind of a fluent speaker, especially in the light of years of experience of trying to guide his people in the proper observation and the extent of meaning of the Fourth Commandment, unquote. Given the broad sweeping categories of people in ancient Israel who were to have a Sabbath rest, the category which tends to get more attention than any of the others are actually the slaves mentioned in Deuteronomy 5:14, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. New Jewish Publication Society version. Noting, kamoka, as well as you, Hertz asserts, quote, the slave is to have the same right to his Sabbath rest as the master. Sabbath rest thus proclaims the quality of master and man, unquote. The Art Scroll Chumash, while summarizing some traditional Jewish perspectives on Deuteronomy 5:14, actually draws the conclusion that the slave in Israel was to keep the Sabbath the same as any other person. Quote, the term slave and maidservant of this commandment refers to non-Jewish slaves who are required to observe the commandments. Consequently, the Torah stresses that they must observe the Sabbath like you, i.e., not only are they forbidden to desecrate the Sabbath for their masters, they personally must observe all the Sabbath laws. Rambam to Exodus 20:20, unquote. From the Art Scroll Chumash. So, how important is the weekly Sabbath or Shabbat for those in God's community? Patrick D. Miller thinks that, quote, neither Jewish nor Christian existence can be maintained as a vital reality without Sabbath sanctification. The Sabbath is set to provide the reality of freedom, celebration, and rest for everyone, especially for those who might not easily find it, unquote. Certainly, the philosophical influence of Deuteronomy 5:14 and the Sabbath needing to be observed by all in ancient Israel cannot go unnoticed. Wright astutely describes, quote, the Sabbath was thus one part, arguably the most important part, of Old Testament laws concerned for workers, and especially for those most at risk in the world of work. Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister from 1957 to 1963, is reported to have described the Sabbath as the first and greatest worker protection act in history, unquote. Deuteronomy 5:15. In Exodus 20, verse 11, the significance of the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat is drawn from the narrative of God's creation of the universe, Genesis 2:1-3. But in Deuteronomy 5:15, the institution of the Sabbath is drawn from the Exodus. You must remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai, your God, brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Adonai, your God, commanded you to keep Yom Shabbat, Tree of Life version. Is this difference the result of two separate sources being employed for the Pentateuch? Or are there different theological emphases present for the origin of the Sabbath? Frequently, throughout the book of Deuteronomy, Israel's deliverance via the Exodus is appealed to so that the population might keep God's instruction. Deuteronomy 15:15, 16:12, 24:18, 22. That those who keep the Sabbath were to remember the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt would surely serve as a reminder of how such slaves never received any weekly day of rest. And such rest was to be extended to all strata of human and animal within the community of Israel. Hertz concludes, quote, the Israelites in Egypt slaved day after day without a rest. By ceasing from toil 1 day in 7, they would distinguish their work from slavery. And in their new life in the promised land, they were to avoid imposing on others what had been so bitter to them, unquote. Wright emphasizes that the Sabbath conveys a message not just to those delivered by the Exodus and their descendants, Israel proper, but that it speaks to those from the world at large who had come to know such an Israel and its God. Quote, the Sabbath thus has the nature both of a creation ordinance and a redemptive sign, and in both respects it directs human minds to the living God. As a creation gift, it has relevance to all human beings. As a sign of redemption, it has particular relevance to God's people, who exist for the sake of the rest of the nations. Thus, in Isaiah 56:2, 4, 6, it features in the description of those foreigners who would choose to identify themselves with Israel and with Israel's God, unquote. Is there a huge difference between Exodus 20, verse 11, making the Sabbath a creation ordinance, and Deuteronomy 5:15, associating it with the Exodus? To Gay, who would hold to various critical presuppositions surrounding Deuteronomy, actually does state, quote, these references are not mutually exclusive but serve different functions. Exodus explains the origin of the Sabbath, while Deuteronomy explains its aim and offers a motive for observing it, unquote. Craigie is keen to detail how there is no independent people of Israel without the Exodus, and how the Sabbath functions to recognize how Israel is a people freed from servitude. Quote, the Exodus from Egypt marks in effect the creation of God's people as a nation, and the memory of that event was also a reminder of the Israelites of their total dependence upon God. Whereas at one time the Israelites had been slaves in Egypt, with no appointed day of rest from their continual and monotonous labor, God's deliverance made them potentially a nation, and the Sabbath was to function as a day of rest in which the deliverance from the former bondage could be remembered with thanksgiving, unquote. Further, in 1 Corinthians 10:1, writing a mixed audience of Jewish and non-Jewish people in Corinth, the Apostle Paul would assert, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. New Revised Standard. While the heritage of the Exodus and deliverance of the Sabbath is part of Jewish believers' biblical and cultural inheritance, it is also something which positively affects the spiritual inheritance of non-Jewish believers as a part of their inclusion within the people of God. Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15 application. We'll close up with this. There is actually some interesting discussion witnessed among Christian commentaries on Deuteronomy on how the Fourth Commandment seemingly applies to Christian people. There are, in the 20th and 21st centuries, various Christians who would disregard the seventh-day Sabbath as being applicable in the post-resurrection era and regard it as being a relic of the Old Testament, relegating it to the pre-resurrection era. Others, as is witnessed, would apply the Fourth Commandment to either a new Sunday Sabbath or their observance of the first day of the week as the Lord's Day. At least in this writer's case, my case, his family's mixed Reformed and Wesleyan heritage was affected by the kinds of sentiments you will see expressed on the transference from a seventh-day Saturday Sabbath to a new Sunday Sabbath. While he believes, I believe, in the post-resurrection era continuity of the seventh-day Sabbath, we do need to still understand the logic of many Christians friendly to a Sabbath principle and recognize that their arguments are not rooted in any kind of sun worship or solar veneration. as elements within the independent Hebrew or Hebraic roots movement may insinuate. Many, thankfully, are favorable to the keeping of at least what would be considered to be a Sabbath. J.A. Thompson is reflective of the view that the seventh-day Sabbath and the common Christian observance of the first day of the week are not to be directly associated with one another, but instead with Sunday church representing a new institution for a new period of salvation history. Quote, this commandment has posed many problems for the Christian. Jesus' statements, Mark 2:27, 28, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, and that he, the Son of Man, was Lord of the Sabbath, removed the law forever from the restrictions of the rabbis. The Christian observance of Sunday is, of course, not an observance of the seventh day, but of the first day, and hence is in the nature of a new commandment based on a new covenant. It is nevertheless the fulfillment of the old. The first day provides opportunity to commemorate the resurrection of Christ, which made possible deliverance from the bondage of sin. See verse 12. And the renewal of life by way of a new creation. See Exodus 20, verses 10 and 11, unquote. This quotation usefully summarizes the issues worthy of reevaluation from the apostolic scriptures, as they involve various Sabbath conflicts between Yeshua of Nazareth and Jewish religious leaders, and some of the issues of the timing of his resurrection from the dead, which in the Messianic Sabbath Helper we do go into. In his resource in the NIV application series, Daniel I. Block makes some pertinent points about how Christians approach the Ten Commandments, and in particular the Sabbath. He details how if contemporary Christian people want to genuinely hold the Ten Commandments in high regard, that they are required to keep the institution of the Sabbath in high regard as well. Block considers that the Sabbath principle has not been abolished, usefully stating how the transition to Sunday took place in the 2nd century CE, after the time of the apostles, and that the Messiah himself indeed was faithful to observe it. He summarizes, quote, if one accepts some terms of the Decalogue as normative for Christians, one must accept them all. This includes the seventh-day Sabbath. Some argue for the normativeness of the Ten Commands as a guide for Christian behavior, but then remove the Sabbath ordinance as an exception, claiming this to be part of the ceremonial law that ended in Christ. However, this approach is indefensible. The seventh-day Sabbath ordinance is embedded in the Decalogue as a fundamental principle of covenant relationship, along with the prohibition of any other gods, of murder, and so on. One may not treat it differently from the rest. Nowhere does the New Testament declare the seventh-day Sabbath passé in Christ. On the contrary, Jesus, e.g. Luke 3:16, and the early disciples observed it. Acts 13:14, 27, 42, 44, 15:21, 16:13, 17:2, 18:4. It seems that by the first half of the 2nd century AD, Christians increasingly gathered to worship on Sunday, though many continued to observe the Sabbath on Saturday. They did not abolish the Sabbath, as the seventh-day Sabbath was the sign of the covenant for Israel, Exodus 31:17. So the first-day Sabbath became the sign of the new covenant for Christians, unquote. Wright's approach to the institution of the Sabbath focuses more on how a rest from labors forces people to focus on God, turning away from themselves and their human ability to create apparent idols. Quote, human beings were created to live and work in the earth. Alienated from God as the source of our fulfillment and rest, we endow work and the whole economic enterprise with a significance beyond its God-given role. Work itself and the material produce it generates can then become an idol to be served without the limitation of God's own higher claim on our lives. In fact, It can come to dominate the whole of life and to define our very being. You are what you are, thereby usurping the God in whose image we are made. This idolatrous potential is particularly evident in our workaholic and economaniac society. The command to rest from work on the Sabbath day forces a pause in this compulsive process and reminds us that time, like the earth itself, belongs to God, as does everything by which we are able to create wealth. Deuteronomy 8:17 following. The Sabbath is thus a further bulwark against idolatry, building the claims of the primary commandments into the ceaseless regularity of daily life itself, of daily life itself, unquote. Okay, we still have some ways to go here. Generally speaking, when the issue of the Sabbath is positively contemplated by Christian examiners, what tends to be focused upon is the need for modern people needing rest and refreshment from a hectic-paced life of work. Dwayne L. Christensen actually approaches the significance of the Sabbath from an opposite direction, affirming how Western people have more time for leisure in the late 20th century, writing in 1991, than they ever have had before. Christensen stresses that leisure, though, is not the same thing as a Sabbath rest. Quote, "It is an established fact that leisure time is increasing. Closing time comes earlier, and the 4-day work week is already a reality for some. We no longer speak of Sunday, but the weekend, and frequently of the long weekend in which holidays are deliberately moved to extend our leisure time. Low-cost tours and recreational vehicles make southern climes and exotic places available to most. It appears that the message of the Sabbath has been victorious. Those who refuse to accept the rhythm of working time and leisure time are flying in the face of one of the most sacred laws of modern society." A closer look, however, suggests that other changes are taking place as well that call for a fresh look at the principle of the Sabbath rest in modern society. In many cases, increased free time does not bring us time for rest and celebration. In fact, there are those who experience dread of free time because it brings with it boredom and loneliness. There are also strong pressures to turn leisure into a new time of activity, often under the guise of a hobby, which in reality sometimes becomes a new type of servile labor that stifles communication within families. Excellence in sports as both participants and spectators becomes obsession. Some seem to settle for little more than the dreariness of dragging through the weekend with the help of TV, fast food meals, a few beers, and quote-unquote extra sleep, unquote. The Sabbath is to be a time uniquely dedicated to God and not to self. While God indeed does want his human creations to enjoy the blessings of the world he created for them, and do so by taking legitimate leisure time and vacations, the weekly Sabbath is not to be viewed as such a vacation. The weekly Sabbath is to be a time of abstention from labor and a time to be consecrated as holy and sacred unto him. So, it should hardly be a surprise why gatherings for worship and study of the scriptures are what emerged within Judaism as being normative for Shabbat. Indeed, the most significant way which people honor the weekly Sabbath is in spending some significant time in association with the local community of God's own. While Judaism can be credited with honoring the Fourth Commandment far more than Christianity, the thought of Miller on the Sabbath, which from his perspective would be a Sunday Sabbath, being a symbol of redemption, cannot go overlooked. Quote, "The Sabbath is a concrete symbol that God's saving grace is what redeems human life rather than any or all work. The Sabbath is a regular time to stop striving and reaching, to stop trying to justify oneself before God and everybody else. It is a time to remember having been set free and accepted in the ultimate sense, and to know that the chief end of life is not found in any human work or accomplishment, but only in glorifying and enjoying God. As such, the Sabbath is an implicit but important pointer toward the reality of justification by faith." Okay. Today's Messianic people have many different reasons for why they keep the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat, ranging from wanting to be obedient to God's word to Messianic Jews honoring it as a part of their background, to non-Jewish believers wanting to be reckoned as a part of the Commonwealth of Israel. Most critically, as Deuteronomy 5:12-15 would direct, it should be for each of us to connect with the God of the Exodus, who promises the ultimate rest in his Son, Messiah Yeshua, for those who have been delivered from the bondage of sin. Hebrews 4:1-10. So I hope that as we prepare to enter into Shabbat in just a few hours for some of you, and some of you all might already be in Shabbat, that this study is something you have found useful, it's something you have found beneficial, and it's something you can indeed reflect upon as you hopefully will get the most out of Shabbat, because of the fact that we live in a world of extreme unrest and unknowns. We live in a time when there are all these things to worry about, there are all these things to be concerned about, yet we need to take comfort in the God of the Exodus, who delivered his people and provides them with the ultimate solace. All right, so let's switch windows back again. And once again, this has been taken from our ministry's publication, the Messianic Sabbath Helper. All right, so now let's move over to some news. And certainly it's been a very concerning week for a lot of people, especially with what took place in New York City outside of the Park East Synagogue. There's been a number of more responses to that. We do live in an increasing age of growing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, even here on American soil. That is something which we definitely need to be monitoring and talking about as today's Messianic people. There are significant road signs at play, but there's also push and pull. We are not in 1930s Germany yet. And unlike 1930s Germany, 2020s America, we have social media. We have many Christian people who, even if they're dispensationalists, they do believe from Holy Scripture that supporting Israel, praying for the peace of Jerusalem is a mandate from the Bible. And they will stand up against anti-Semitism and call it out. Of course, the big question is today's Messianic Jewish community. And do we look at ourselves as being part of a significant end-time move of God, a prophetic move of the Holy Spirit, in which case these things are to be anticipated from the Holy Scriptures? Or do we see ourselves as just another formal branch of Judaism, which is going to, have a lot of theology, but isn't too keen on paying attention to world events and is just expecting these things to blow over? I mean, these are some of the internal tensions we're going to see in the coming days. Okay, now we do the news roundup after the theology roundup, because the news roundup is, of course, something which is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. We are reminded to, number one, be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia, Ukraine. We've got some stories regarding that. And number three, reason and sanity here on the American home front. I just mentioned some of the anti-Semitism, but we also have those ongoing things. Russiagate, the release of the Epstein files, AutoPen, what else, right? A lot of people are, still having to sort through the fallout from the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes interview. So we got a lot of things to be concerned about right now. Okay. All of these news stories I'm about to go through These will be available for you to look at later this afternoon when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. That way you can check out the various links, read the stories, watch the different clips, etc. All right, our first story, and this is from Instagram, from Ynet Global. Opinion: the boomers lost the war on anti-Semitism. So here you see Ronald Lauder stood before the World Jewish Congress Gala, Gala audience, and declared that the only ways to fight anti-Semitism are education and public relations. It was a perfectly scripted line for a black tie evening and an indictment of an entire worldview. They mistook applause for protection, comfort for continuity, and branding for belief. And this is the opinion: the next generation must rebuild Jewish civilization through Hebrew self-defense and moral courage. So a lot of this is responding to how, yes, anti-Semitism is on the increase, but some of the methods which were used, particularly in the last generation by baby boomers, they won't work anymore. Well, we just need more education. We just need we just need better understanding of the causes of the Holocaust. We need better PR. This opinion piece is seemingly saying that's not going to work. Instead, we need to demonstrate moral courage, fortitude, and be strong. I mean, actually, the biggest thing that anybody needs to be stressing is we need to be praying to God. We need to be getting on our face before God and seeking his protection, his preservation. And for the Messianic community, we need to be getting on our face saying, Lord, when are we? What mistakes have we made? What do we need to correct? And how do we need to be moving forward? How much of that are we going to see? I would suspect we're not going to see it that much until things get more dramatic than they already have been. All right. Our next story, also from Ynet Global. This is from the 19th of November, so it's 2 days old. But here, reflecting on the meeting at the White House, President Trump, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Palestinian state within 5 years. Saudi Crown Prince presses U.S. for binding guarantee. After meeting President Donald Trump in Washington, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said the United States must guarantee negotiations for a Palestinian state within 5 years. He also stressed that no Muslim troops will join any international force in Gaza. So here, you want to know about that point. In conversations, scrolling down, in conversations held in Washington after his meeting with Trump, the Crown Prince also made clear that he believes any international force planned for Gaza will not include troops from Arab or Muslim countries. His reasoning was that Muslim soldiers would not fight Hamas or disarm the group. Okay. I know some of us, we don't like, we need a guarantee on a Palestinian state within 5 years, but we can't agree with the logic that any international force, peacekeepers in Gaza, they shouldn't be from Arab or Muslim countries, because will they be willing to disarm Hamas? So I think there is some logic in that argument. Okay, our next story, and we've got a couple of social media responses to what took place at Park East Synagogue in New York. Mayor Eric Adams, who is the outgoing mayor of New York. What happened at Park East Synagogue last night was totally unacceptable, no matter your faith or background. This type of protest and vile language should concern us all. When you desecrate one house of worship, you desecrate them all. I'll be visiting Park East Synagogue to stand with our Jewish community when I am back in town, because he was actually visiting Israel. Also from Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, she responded, no New Yorker should be intimidated or harassed at their house of worship. What happened last night at Park East Synagogue was shameful and a blatant attack on the Jewish community. Hate has no place in New York. And yes, those are both Democrats, and I agree with them. And thank you for standing against anti-Semitism and hate. Okay, we're going to switch gears slightly to the Russia-Ukraine situation. From Visegrad 24 yesterday, 3:14 p.m., so this was after yesterday's episode. Breaking, Financial Times writes that the U.S. expects Zelensky to sign the new peace proposal within a week. And before we went live, that has not changed. After that, the deal will be presented to Russia, and the U.S. wants fighting to stop in December. Look, we got to pray for peace, Russia and Ukraine. This is something which has been going on now for almost 4 years. It's been devastating to a generation of both Ukrainians as well as Russians. We cannot expect the war to continue down to the last man. So concessions will have to be made. Biblically, this falls into the Matthew 24 category of wars and rumors of wars. It's not good by any means. Somebody is going to have to make some concession they don't want to make for an honorable peace, and that's going to be on both sides. All right. Per some of the responses to the recent visit of the Saudi Crown Prince to Washington and the announcement that Saudi Arabia will be able to purchase the F-35. Here you have from open source intel. This is from yesterday, November the 20th. First, Israel operates F-35s with unique privileges unavailable to any other partner. It is the only country permitted to independently modify the aircraft, integrate its own weapons, avionics, and advanced Israeli-made electronic warfare / radar jamming systems without U.S. approval. Seemingly, other countries which purchase the F-35, like the United Kingdom, for example, it may have permission. It has to get permission, though, to modify it per their needs, but they have to do it in direct conjunction with the United States. Israel can do this on their own. And indeed, one of the benefits of the U.S.-Israeli alliance is that many of those Israeli innovations get returned back or offered back to the United States. Now, an Israeli Prime Minister's office spokesperson says, for years, there's been a clear understanding between the United States and Israel that Israel maintains its qualitative military edge. This was true yesterday, it is true today, and Prime Minister Netanyahu believes it will be true in the future, she said. So, seemingly, when Israel gets more U.S. technology, it can modify it on its own without any special permission. Other partners, NATO partners, if they want to modify it, they've got to do it in conjunction with the U.S. Israel's the only one which has the permission to modify things independently. Okay, going to change things to some theology, but very relevant. This came across my Instagram feed. Right now, the Evangelical Theological Society annual meeting is occurring in Boston. And here you have Dr. Alan Kirshner, who is a major pre-wrath rapture advocate. He's attending a presentation by Dr. Michael Rydelnik. Many of you will know who he is. And Dr. Michael Rydelnik's paper last night at ETS in Boston, he made the point that the term anti-Semitism was coined in the late 1800s to be more palatable and scientific because the phrase Jew hatred at that time sounded too harsh. Rydelnik suggested we stop using the soft term anti-Semitism and go back to Jew hatred. Dr. Kirshner, I agree. Yeah, the term anti-Semitism, and I don't think you're going to completely see it disappear, but it was considered to be more scientific, more palatable, as the commentary says, right, more sophisticated perhaps than just the term Jew hatred, which would be too harsh, right, too primitive. But that is what we are encountering. And yeah, maybe we'll come up with some kind of third alternative. Maybe hatred of the Jewish people is more palatable than just Jew hatred. But yes, that's the time in which we now live. And we are all having to sort through the outcome, the responses of October the 6th. Okay. All right, let's change things up just a little bit. This came across my Instagram feed. American Airlines, which is based in Fort Worth, so here in the Metroplex. DFW Airport is its main capital hub. It's preparing to celebrate its 100th anniversary, and it's released this flagship jet 777 in a retro livery, seemingly going back to the 1920s. Some of you all have seen the current American Airlines livery with what has been commonly described as the Horus Eagle. That came as a result of American merging with U.S. Airways in 2013. And American Airlines used to have a really sharp livery. And with the classic, red, white, and blue on polished aluminum with the AA. Many of y'all remember that. The current American Airlines livery, awful. Absolutely awful. It would have been better if they took the U.S. Airways livery from 2012, 2013, when they were in merger talks, and just changed U.S. Airways to American. But as somebody who does follow the aviation industry and likes to see planes and that kind of stuff, I thought that that was a fun thing to pass along. Okay, so we accidentally skipped over a story, so I've got to get the link in. I was a little rushed earlier this morning. So, okay, but this has to do with the current peace plan for Russia and Ukraine. Okay, there we go. I just got it opened up in the window. This is from Open Source Intel. This was posted 6:14 p.m. November the 20th. Trump's 28-point peace plan for Ukraine and Russia in short. And you can, of course, look through this all on your own. Some of the big things, of course. Number 3, Russia agrees not to invade neighbors and NATO stops expansion. 4, Russia and NATO launch a de-escalation dialogue. 5, U.S. gives Ukraine post-war security guarantees. 6, Ukraine's military capped at 600,000 troops. 7, Ukraine amends constitution to renounce NATO membership. We're going to scroll down a little bit. You can look at this later. Number 17, U.S. and Russia extend the START nuclear treaty. Number 22, neither side can change borders by force in the future. Now, number 21, this is where there's probably going to be a lot of discussion. We'll just say it like that. New territorial lines set. Ukraine withdraws from remaining Donetsk and Lugansk. Russia withdraws from Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk. Oh, I pronounced that properly. And Sumy with a demilitarized Donetsk buffer under Russian recognition. And yeah, you can just look at this in its entirety later. But this is something which is now being circulated among both the Ukrainians as well as Russia, and certainly NATO, Europe. Everyone is getting their opinions in. And we're going to have a few more things to note regarding this. Okay, our next story, this came across, no, that's not it. There it is. This came across my X feed yesterday, and here you see Claire Voltaire commenting on a post, Zachary Foster, who says, and this is in regard to what took place at the Park East Synagogue in New York. Zachary Foster says, regrettably, many synagogues in the United States are political institutions as much as they are religious ones. That makes them fair game for protest, because people are saying, wait a second, it's not right for all those protesters being out in front of a synagogue protesting the policies of the Israeli government. I said this yesterday. They should be in front of the Israeli consulate. They should be in front of the Israeli embassy, not a house of worship. This person says, no, synagogues are frequently places of political dialogue. It's fair game. So Claire Voltaire responds, there are 20 to 50 million Christian Zionists in the U.S. A conservative estimate for churches who support Israel stand at 50,000 to 100,000. 0 documented terror attacks explicitly targeting churches because of their pro-Israel stance. And here she says, there are 7 million Jews in the U.S. In the past 20 years, more than 5,000 synagogues in the U.S. have been targeted by anti-Semitic attacks, including vandalism, arson, harassment, and bomb threats. Okay, so really the question is, you got all these pro-Israel churches in America. Why do we not see protests in front of them, right? And, you know, we can add to the list the few Messianic congregations and synagogues, right? Why are you only protesting and threatening synagogues? Why don't you go protest at a few churches and see what happens, right? In the future, we should expect to see more of that. We should expect to actually see, particularly among misguided young people, you know, you're a church which supports Israel. We're going to protest you. We're going to boycott you. We're going to boycott your denomination. Damn you. I mean, I would expect to see some of that because we did see some of it in the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots. So this is just something to keep in mind. It was a useful opinion I thought I should pass along. Okay, from the Jewish Insider. And here, this is from November the 20th. So yesterday, you can read through this article. It's very useful. Mamdani, the mayor-elect of New York. He hasn't even been inaugurated yet. Nefesh Ben Nefesh event at New York synagogue. So this is what was being protested. Violation of international law. The mayor-elect's statement comes as he also sought to distance himself from anti-Israel protesters who demonstrated outside the synagogue event. So mainly, what was apparently happening at the synagogue was a discussion about how American Jews, this is how you plan to possibly make Aliyah to Israel. You're an American Jew, you want to make Aliyah to Israel, this is how you do it. So protest, perfectly legitimate, because a lot of those people, if they go to Israel, they're going to become, you know, settlers on land that Israel is not supposed to be occupying, basically. So, yeah, this Mamdani character, he is going to be a huge challenge. Already is a challenge. Russia, Ukraine. This is from Visegrad 24, 3:25 a.m. today, November the 21st. The United States has discussed Donald Trump's proposed peace plan with Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev. Washington presented Zelensky with its controversial proposal to end the war, a document that many experts argue looks less like a peace plan and more like a capitulation, particularly for Ukraine. Despite the concerns, Zelensky said he is ready to engage. So obviously, we will wait and see what happens. But now with the Middle East situation, and of course, there's going to be starting and stopping in the Middle East situation, Gaza. But with that seemingly underway, and of course, I use the term underway from a Middle East standpoint, not from a Western standpoint. Now the momentum is shifting. Let's get this Russia-Ukraine deal figured out. This can't continue to go on into another year. Okay, here's a post on Instagram from Dr. Eli David. Very useful. There's a 15-second clip here. Again, the Park East Synagogue. This is from yesterday afternoon, where he says, Jews are the canary in the coal mine. When protests targeting synagogues are treated as acceptable, as happened yesterday in New York, it signals a broader normalization of hatred and violence that will spread to every corner of the society. Okay. Now, one of the things I did say, and I'll repeat it again, yes, there are going to be a lot of comparisons made between this and what took place in 1930s Germany. And with that, we need to keep in mind that unlike 1930s Germany, we do have social media today. People can be alerted to this. Unlike 1930s Germany and its Christianity, which had a deeply embedded anti-Semitism, some of it, unfortunately, involving Martin Luther's anti-Semitism. And I don't want to speak universally. We can mention Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others who stood against the Nazis. Okay, but on the whole, there was a latent anti-Semitism and just kind of a, you want to call it an apathy toward Jews. Today in North America, there is a very pro-Israel sentiment among Christians, an acknowledgement Jesus was a Jew, an acknowledgement of past Christian injustices to the Jewish people. And even if they are tempered by a dispensational pre-trib rapture ideology, more Christians than not recognize something like that as bad, not good. And so there's going to be some start and stops with this, anti-Semitism in America. This is a road sign. Dr. Eli David called it a canary in the coal mine. Absolutely. But the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, which has been released since October the 7th, 2023, it's something which can be crawled back a little bit. It's not at slippery slope levels, but we do have to acknowledge how there are going to be some of these moments where it jumps ahead forward. This election of Zohran Mamdani in New York City, you're going to see it jump forward, but doesn't mean we're at the end yet. What it means is that a lot of American Jews are going to be thinking about, I got to move to a more Jewish positive place like South Florida. Some are going to say, I need to be thinking about what it would take to get Israeli citizenship. Young people are going to say, I'm going to grow up here in America with this potential anti-Semitism problem. Maybe I need to move to Israel. Maybe that's a better place for me to get married and raise my children. There are going to be all kinds of responses to this. Okay, so our next story, so we got 4 more to go. This is from Leo Terrell, also on X, noting something which took place recently at a Friendsgiving dinner inside Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, where you can watch this clip. It's 40 seconds. This is another really bad thing where you see somebody dressed up as President Trump, President Biden, Antony Blinken, as well as Marco Rubio, and they're just kind of like eating what appears to be pieces of human beings. And of course, it's talking about the conflict in Israel-Gaza. Israel War Room, this blatant promotion of blood libel and Hamas propaganda must be condemned. So Leo Terrell, horrifying. There are not enough words in the dictionary that are strong enough to condemn this type of hate. This is serious. This is happening on American soil. And yeah, we got to be paying attention to it. And the Messianic community, it's got, some of the things, it directs its attention to sometimes take it away from when we are matters. Okay, I suspect there'll probably be more responses to that by Monday over the weekend. Okay, from Visegrad 24, November the 21st, this is from this morning, 7:47 a.m. Reuters reports that the U.S. has told Ukraine it will stop sending military aid and provide intelligence sharing if Ukraine doesn't sign the peace proposal within a week. Okay. We know that just as we have seen throughout this year in different conflicts, different negotiations, this could be a negotiation tactic. Hey, you need to take this seriously. Otherwise, we're going to crawl back our military aid, our intelligence support for you. You need to take this seriously, Ukraine. That could just be a negotiation tactic. Now, right before we got started, I always look to see if there are any final news stories from Open Source Intel Defender. 9-minute, 57-second clip. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky gave a somber address to the nation this morning from outside the presidential office in Kiev, reminiscent of a speech the morning of the Russian invasion in February 2022, stating that Ukraine is now facing one of the most difficult moments in its history, adding that Ukraine has a very difficult choice, either loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner, the United States. Either the difficult 28 points or an extremely difficult winter, the most difficult and further risks. A life without freedom, without dignity, without justice, and believing someone who has already attacked us twice. Okay, so you can watch that in its entirety. But the point is that, the Trump administration is serious. Here we got our 28 points. Ukraine, you got to take these seriously. And hopefully the same kind of pressure will be applied to Russia. And then back to the American home front. Our final story, this came up moments before we went live on my feed on Instagram from the New York Post. Bill Hillary Clinton told to appear for depositions in Jeffrey Epstein probe. Breaking, Representative James Comer has ordered Bill and Hillary Clinton to appear for depositions next month. That would be in December, amid the House Oversight Committee's probe of Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, so continue to pray for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. So we've got all these things going around, but as believers, God is in complete control. Continue to pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Remember how this conflict does affect the Jewish believers in Israel. Peace, Russia and Ukraine. We're likely to see some developments in the next week or so regarding this, and a lot of different responses from the Ukrainians, the Russians, NATO and Europe, and even here at home. And pray for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. We've got growing anti-Semitic problems, the Park East Synagogue situation, what happened. You saw that Friendsgiving dinner, likely to be more responses to that. We've got the Epstein files that are supposed to be released. A lot of things to be concerned about. Okay, now on Monday, and just have a brief announcement because we do have the Thanksgiving holiday coming up and we're going to be entertaining a lot of families. So probably Thursday and Friday, not going to be posting anything. I could still post a McKee moment, but probably not. We're going to go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with Messianic Insider. That's the plan. And we're likely to address the Sabbath was made for man passages in the New Testament, that entry from the Messianic Sabbath Helper. I think it's a 3-parter. So be looking forward to that. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not already, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide array of free articles, frequently asked questions, entries. You can check out some back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, and different McKee Moment shorts, etc. And please, if you have not, be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart on social media. It'll definitely help our exposure. We'll see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shabbat Shalom, and take care.